Hello, my name is Erin Wallace, and my presentation today is about bias, blocking CTE excellent. I chose to not focus on a single student population, but on multiple student populations affected by one singular issue, which is our bias. How do we encourage all students to pursue the future of their choice? Bias is a strong inclination of the mind or a preconceived opinion about something or someone. It's important to note that bias can be favorable or unfavorable. For this presentation, however, I am going to focus on bias and the negative impact it can have on our CTE programs. Who is affected by bias? I believe that all our students can be affected negatively by our bias, whether it be conscious or subconscious, but the student groups that are most affected by bias are non-traditional gender, students with disabilities, low-income students, and racial minorities. Bias leads to learning barriers. Our unconscious bias can create learning barriers and missed opportunities for many of our underrepresented student groups. According to the troubled history of vocational education, in CTE education, many of these bias are rooted in the historical tracking practices that steered these underrepresented student groups toward vocational education programs that would lead them towards low-paying, labor-focused jobs instead of college. This can be seen in gender bias that I think is very historically rooted, with boys being driven toward applied vocational skills such as wood shop and metal shop, and females being driven toward homemaking education such as home economics. This is something I chose to focus on because it's something I'm concerned about in my own CTE program, where I am seeing a discrepancy in gender enrollment in a variety of different CTE courses, but especially in my own. So it is something that I'm seeing on a local level, and so I'm really curious to explore it some more. These discrepancies have been recorded in a recent study in 2018 that looked at the difference between female and male concentrators. And as you can see, male concentrators had higher enrollment in every single CTE discipline, with the exception of human resources and health sciences, where females had a higher enrollment. In my CET course, I am seeing a discrepancy in gender enrollment, but mine is not supported by this data. In fact, I have a higher level of female enrollment over male enrollment. But I do think it goes back to that same root cause of a potential bias, either within the student body or in the counseling department or in the instruction or course that I'm providing. So it's something I'm curious about and wanting to explore further. So how do we break our bias? Because it is having an effect on our student population. So here's a few strategies that we can look at to change the trend in CTE classrooms. Number one is career and academic advising and awareness. I think there is a huge focus on counselors and academic advisors, the impact that they can potentially have on students enrolling in their CTE pathways. And so I do think that it is extremely important for counselors to present that with a very neutral lens, and so they don't accidentally steer students into a path based on their own bias. A second one is inclusive curriculum. This is a responsibility of all instructors to create curriculum that is accessible by all of our student populations, with a lens toward being gender neutral, toward having curriculum that's accessible by our students with disabilities, which leads me to my next one, which is student accommodations. Is our curriculum able to be accessed by all of our student groups? What accommodations can we use to support all of our students? And the last strategy is to provide CTE educators with professional development opportunities that focus specifically on bias, whether it be conscious or subconscious. Is it somehow built into our mindset when we're creating our curriculum? Luckily, I do believe that there is a lot of support already in place that sort of makes us focus on these different strategies. For example, there's federal legislation that strictly presents accommodations for these different subgroups. For example, Students with Disabilities Act provides some structure for instructors to have to provide support for students with disabilities. The Perkins funding also allocates specific monies to different CTE departments and requires that it be spent equally between different CTE departments and different school districts. Some other support that I'm seeing is equity teams on the district level that focus on equity and focused on how to have no gender bias in your education. And I also see some equity professional development opportunities for staff. What else can be done to support staff in schools when focusing on their bias? I think going back to this problem of counseling and advising process for enrolling students, I feel there needs to be a lot of transparency in that process. So if we do see a situation where students are heavily enrolled in one place but not another, I think that's really important to go back and examine potentially why is that happening. I also believe that staff need to continually be trained specifically regarding bias in their instruction and how we support our students. This is a chart that I found from Education Weekly. That's a publication that provides bias training. And this kind of had some do's and don'ts about how to specifically target bias in our instruction and ways that we can learn and grow from our historical practices.